Thousands of years before brain scans existed, Vedic thinkers built a map of the mind so precise that modern neuroscience keeps confirming it piece by piece. If you've ever tried to fix your mindset and failed, it's probably because you are working on the wrong part of your mind entirely. That changes today. In this video, I'll show you number 1, what the 4 distinct parts of your mind actually are and why treating them as one is why most self-improvement stalls. Number 2, how modern neuroscience mapped the exact same 4 functions thousands of years later without knowing it. Number 3, how to identify which part is running you in any given moment and exactly how to intervene on it. Let's get into it. A woman I spoke with a while back had read every productivity book on the shelf. She'd done the journaling, the meditation apps, the cold showers, and she still couldn't stop the spiral that hit her every Sunday night. That creeping dread, the replaying of old mistakes, the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with her. She wasn't lazy, she wasn't broken. She was using a blunt instrument on a precision problem. She was trying to fix her mind without knowing which part of her mind was actually misfiring. The Vedic tradition calls the inner instrument the antahkarana. That's a Sanskrit term, but don't let it throw you. It just means the inner tool. And according to this framework, that inner tool has 4 distinct functions, not one. The first is manas. This is the reactive mind, the part that receives sensory input and immediately generates a response. You smell coffee and you want it. Someone cuts you off in traffic and your pulse spikes. Manas doesn't think, it reacts. It's fast, automatic, and it runs almost constantly. The second is Buddhi. This is the discerning intellect, the part of you that can step back, assess a situation, and choose a response rather than just firing one off. Buddhi is the part that knows the Sunday night spiral is irrational even when you can't stop it. It's the capacity for wisdom, not just information. The third is Ahamkara. This is the ego function and not in the pop psychology sense. Ahamkara is the mechanism that says I. It's the part of you that takes experiences and attaches them to a self-concept. When something goes wrong at work and you don't just feel bad about the situation, but you feel like you are bad, that's Ahamkara at work. It's the identity maker. The fourth is Chitta. This is the storehouse. The accumulated impressions, memories, emotional residue, and habitual patterns that have built up over your entire life. Chitta is the reason you can have a completely irrational fear of a specific smell, or why certain types of people trigger you before they've even said anything. It's the archive that the other 3 functions keep drawing from. Now think about what most people do when they want to work on themselves. They try to think their way out of emotional reactions. They try to logic themselves out of patterns that aren't stored in logic. They're using Buddhi to try to fix a Chitta problem, or they're trying to calm manas by suppressing it, which is like trying to quiet a river by pushing down on the water. The ancient wisdom meets neuroscience connection starts right here, because the Vedic thinkers weren't making metaphors, they were describing functional architecture, and modern neuroscience, using fMRI machines and decades of research, has arrived at almost the same map. Takeaway: before you try to change anything about how you think or feel, you need to know which of these 4 functions is active. You can't intervene on something you haven't identified. In the 1990s, neuroscientists started noticing something strange. When people weren't doing anything, when they were just resting, a specific set of brain regions would light up. They called it the default mode network. It activates during mind-wandering, self-referential thought, replaying memories, imagining futures, and constructing a narrative sense of self. If you've read the first section, you already know what that sounds like. The default mode network is doing exactly what Ahamkara and Chitta do together. It's constructing and maintaining the self, and it's pulling from the archive of stored impressions to do it. The Sunday night spiral that woman couldn't stop, default mode network running hot, feeding on Chitta, reinforcing Ahamkara. Then there's the executive control network. This activates when you're doing deliberate, focused cognitive work. Goal setting, decision making, inhibiting impulse. That is Buddhi, functionally identical. Neuroscience just named it later and measured it differently. And the salience network, that's the system that decides what gets your attention. It monitors your internal and external environment constantly, flags what matters, and triggers the appropriate response network. That is manas, the reactive sensory processing function that the Vedic thinkers described thousands of years ago. The reason this matters, and this is where ancient wisdom meets neuroscience in the most practical way, is that these networks don't all respond to the same interventions. The executive control network, Buddhi, responds to deliberate reasoning, structured reflection, logical reframing, but the default mode network, Ahamkara and Chitta combined, does not respond well to logic. It responds to pattern interruption, to somatic input, to repetition over time, to narrative reframing at an emotional level. This is why telling yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, almost never works. You're using Buddhi to address a default mode network pattern. Wrong tool. It's like trying to rewrite a hard drive by talking to the screen. And it's also why certain practices that seem irrational, breathwork, true repetitive physical movement, cold exposure, actually work at a neurological level. They're not bypassing the mind. They're speaking directly to the parts of the mind that don't understand language. The Vedic system had specific practices mapped to each of the four functions, not one universal technique for the mind. Four different entry points for four different problems. That precision is what made it work then, and it's what makes it work now. Takeaway: when a mental or emotional pattern isn't responding to thinking about it, that's a signal you're working on the wrong network. Switch the tool, not the effort level. The gap between understanding a framework and using it in real life is where most people fall off. So let me make this as concrete as possible. There's a practice in Vedic psychology that has no fancy name. It's just the habit of asking one question. When you notice any mental or emotional disturbance, which part of me is this, not why am I feeling this? That question sends you into the default mode network, which is exactly where the problem lives. You end up ruminating, not diagnosing. Instead, which part? If the feeling is fast, automatic, triggered by something external, a sound, a notification, someone's tone of voice, that's manas, the reactive function. The intervention for manas is a pause, literally, a breath, a brief physical stillness, anything that creates a gap between stimulus and response. Even 3 seconds is enough to stop manas from handing the wheel directly to ahamkara. If the feeling is a slow, persistent narrative about who you are, I always do this. I'm the kind of person who can't. People like me don't get that. That's ahamkara, the identity function. The intervention for ahamkara is not argument. Arguing with your self-concept makes it stronger. The intervention is observation. You notice the story, you name it as a story. There's the narrative again. You don't fight it. You just refuse to fund it with attention. If the feeling seems to come from nowhere, if it's a mood that arrived before you could trace it to a thought, a heaviness, an inexplicable anxiety, a pull toward a specific behavior you know isn't serving you, that's chitta, stored impression surfacing. The intervention for chitta is not intellectual, it's repetitive, embodied practice over time. Breathwork, movement, true, consistent sleep, these aren't wellness trends. They're tools for rewriting the archive. And if you can observe all of this, if there's a part of you watching the reaction, watching the narrative, watching the mood, and staying relatively stable while it does, that's Buddhi. The discerning intellect. Your job is to strengthen that function so it's available more often, especially when the other three are loud. The way you strengthen Buddhi is through consistent, deliberate reflection. Not journaling about your feelings, journaling about your patterns, not asking what happened today, but which function was dominant today and what triggered the shift. That question, practiced daily, builds the muscle of self-observation over time. The ancient wisdom meets neuroscience insight here is this. Self-knowledge is not a philosophical luxury. It's a precision tool. The more accurately you can locate where a disturbance is happening, the more targeted your response can be. And the more targeted your response, the less energy you waste fighting yourself. The woman I mentioned at the start, once she understood that her Sunday spiral was chitta surfacing through the default mode network and not a character flaw and not something she could think her way out of, she stopped trying to reason with it. She started using a 10-minute breathwork practice instead. The spiral didn't disappear overnight, but within 3 weeks it had lost most of its grip. Not because she fixed herself, because she finally used the right tool. Takeaway. Tonight, when you notice any mental disturbance, don't ask why. Ask which part. Then match the tool to the function. That question, which part is this? Sounds simple, but applying it consistently to your actual life, your specific patterns, your specific sticking points, is where most people need a real conversation, not another framework. If you've tried working on your mind on your own and you keep hitting the same wall, the fastest way through it is usually a direct conversation. I offer free 15 to 30-minute consultations, no pitch, no agenda, just a focused look at where you are, what's actually blocking you, and what the most precise next step looks like for your situation. You'll walk away with something concrete, whether we ever work together or not. The link to book is in the description at dailymindreset.com/consultation. If this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribe. There's a lot more where this came from. Which of the four functions, manas, buddhi, ahamkara, or chitta, do you think is most dominant in your life right now?